let's just jump right in with a question, and I want you to be really honest with yourself here.
Think about it. Could you be ordered to harm a totally innocent person? I mean, really hurt them? Your gut reaction is probably, no way, of course not, right? Well, what if I told you one of the most famous and frankly infamous experiments in history was designed to find out if that's actually true?
So picture this. It's 1961. The whole world is glued to the trial of a Nazi war criminal, Adolf Eichmann. And his defense for his horrific actions? You've probably heard it before. I was just following orders. This really got a Yale psychologist, Stanley Milgram, thinking. He had this burning question. Could a totally normal person, someone like you or me, be pushed into doing terrible things just because an authority figure told them to? He just had to find out. So he set up an experiment.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of how he did it. The setup Milgram created was, well, it was incredibly clever and, honestly, pretty deceptive.
So here's the basic setup. People volunteered for what they thought was a study on memory and learning. When they showed up, there was a rigged draw, so they were always picked to be the teacher. The other person, who was secretly an actor, became the learner. The teacher's job was simple. Every time the learner got an answer wrong, they had to give him an electric shock. And with each wrong answer, the shock got stronger. Now here's the crucial part they didn't know. The learner was an actor, and the shocks? Totally fake.
And you have to see this machine they used. It wasn't just some little box. It was designed to look serious and, frankly, scary. It had 30 different switches, starting at a mild 15 volts, but they went all the way up to a terrifying 450 volts. And the labels on it? They went from slight shock to danger, severe shock. And then the last two were just marked with a big XXX. I mean, just imagine sitting in front of that. And to make the whole thing feel completely real, they gave the teacher a little sample shock, a real 45-volt jolt right at the start.
So, as the voltage goes up, the actor in the other room starts to, scream in pain. He complains about a heart condition. Eventually, he just goes silent. Naturally, a lot of the teachers got really upset and wanted to stop. But whenever they hesitated, the experimenter, this guy in a gray lab coat, would calmly but firmly tell them things like, "Please continue," or "The experiment requires that you continue." And finally, "You have no other choice. You must go on." I mean, can you imagine the pressure? You think you might be killing someone, and this authority figure is telling you that you have no choice.
So, what do you think happened? Before he ran the full experiment, Milgram actually asked his students and a bunch of other psychologists to predict the results. And what they said, well, that's what makes the actual outcome so absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, all the experts, the psychologists, the students, they were pretty much in agreement. They thought, maybe 1% of people, a really tiny sadistic fringe, would go all the way to the maximum 450-volt shock. They fundamentally believed that most people just wouldn't do it. They couldn't have been more wrong. 65%. Let that sink in. Nearly 2/3 of the participants, and we're talking about totally normal people, accountants, teachers, laborers, they obeyed the orders and flipped that final 450-volt switch. This is the whole point. This wasn't about a few bad apples. It was the majority of people. But here's something that's super important to understand. They weren't just happily pressing buttons. These people were in genuine distress. You could see them sweating, trembling, stuttering, some even burst into this weird, uncontrollable nervous laughter. They pleaded with the experimenter to let them stop. One guy actually had a full-blown seizure from the stress. So it's not that they wanted to do it, but they did it anyway. As you can imagine, when these results came out, people were horrified. The outcry was huge. And the thing is, the Milgram experiment wasn't a one-off. It was actually one of several really controversial studies from that era that basically forced the entire scientific world to take a hard look in the mirror and face a massive ethical crisis.
Let's just quickly look at the timeline here. Back in the 50s, you had the Robbers Cave experiment, where researchers basically manipulated a bunch of kids at summer camp into hating each other, all without them knowing. Then, of course, Milgram in 61. And a decade after that, the infamous Stanford prison experiment had to be stopped early because college kids assigned to be guards got so abusive and cruel. Look, these experiments gave us some incredible, if disturbing, insights, but they clearly crossed a major ethical line. Things got so bad that Congress had to step in, and in 1974 they passed something called the National Research Act, basically to say, okay, this can't happen again.
And that's where things get complicated, because this leads us to a huge debate that is still raging today. The solution that was supposed to fix the problem, well, it ended up creating a whole new can of worms for scientists.
So this new law created these things called institutional review boards, or IRBs for short. Basically, they're ethics committees. Every single university or research center has one, and their job is to look at any proposed research that involves people and make sure it's ethical. Their number one goal? Protect the participants. Stop the sins of the past from ever happening again.
But here's the rub. As one historian, Zachary Schrag, points out, these rules were really written with dangerous medical experiments in mind, testing new drugs on people. They weren't really designed for social science. So now, a lot of scientists argue that these rules, while totally well-intentioned, have gone way too far. They say a simple, harmless psychology survey now has to jump through the same hoops as a risky clinical trial, and they worry that it's actually holding back important science.
Which brings us right back to where we started, with a really tough question. There's no doubt the Milgram experiment taught us something profound and deeply unsettling about ourselves, but it came at a real cost to the people in it. So, in trying to protect people from that kind of harm, have we accidentally made it impossible to ask the next big, uncomfortable, but maybe necessary question? That's the tricky balancing act between protection and progress, and it's a debate that is far from over.